Well, I am delighted to actually introduce Dr. Patty Fletcher. I had the good fortune to pick her up yesterday at the airport, and her flight was just a teeny bit late. She was pretty impressed with Charlotte, all the dogwoods and azaleas. We ordered that up just for her. So she just recently came from South by Southwest. She also was part of a conference, Work Human, and she works with folks from all over, whether they're startups or Fortune 500s. She has worked with IBM, SAP, Salesforce, Intuit, just to name a few. And when I asked her where her Boston accent was, she used to be in broadcasting too, so she's done a little bit of everything. When she leaves here, she goes back to Boston, and she's going to be part of disrupting HR in Boston, and that she's heading to the Unleashed conference in Las Vegas. So her book, which you can see on the tables, is called Disruptors for Women Who Break the Mold, and I'm excited to invite her up to the stage to talk about her passion. Thank you, Patty.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good?
Right, it's all about innovation. It's all about getting different perspectives. And like I said, we all say we want change, but then change is afoot and we get really angry, right? So here I am working in this technology world, working with this huge community of about 2 million developers. Only about 8% of them were women. And they were really excited about what I had to say about what happens when. There was a lot of kind of correlation at best, research, but it was kind of cool. So I said, great, why don't we do a panel at this conference? It was a technology conference, part of that huge community of people. Of course, not all of them went. But this huge technology conference, and I'm going to host a panel with men and women, and we're going to talk about gender equity in technology. And in the room, in the audience, there were a bunch of people I knew. I've known them for years, a bunch of men, and maybe like 3 women out of, I don't know, 250, 300, a little bit bigger than this room. So I get up there, and I'm with my fancy panel, and I look at the audience, and I see people starting to leave. By 10 minutes, I would say a third of the room. By half, it was the event staff. I mean, it was awful, right? It was really, really bad. And I thought, what the heck? And then the next day, I started getting hate mail and hate blogs written about me. Awful, just terrible. And I was so naive. Right here I was thinking everyone's going to be all for this. We're going to talk about action instead of just the same old rhetoric about the numbers. And instead, what I got was a backlash. Because the people in the room were not prepared for what I had to say, and probably because I didn't say the right things. The men were angry at me, and the women were extremely vocal and angry with me. This conference was sponsored by a very large global Fortune 50 company, and not one of those executives who pushed me to do it stuck up for me. Instead, right, they became the bird that put their head in the sand. Ooh, vertigo, don't do that. Whew! So that was hard. And by the way, you guys, some of these people were my friends. And they were distancing themselves from me. Like, oh my God, right? I can't believe it. And every single one of them, the reason I did this was because everyone agreed that the status quo they were working in was ineffective and inefficient. And yet here I am creating this conversation, trying to create a platform, and boom, bad. No one to help. So I licked my wounds. I felt sorry for myself. I was doing all the stuff bad. I didn't ask myself, is this working for you? Because I was too into the gloom and doom, and I was too into the self-pity and all that stuff, because it didn't work out the way I thought it was going to. Because maybe I didn't ask all of those relational kinds of questions I could have asked beforehand. So a really good friend and coworker, this amazing woman, reached out to me and said, hey, she's, by the way, the community manager, so she saw it all, and I'm convinced got rid of some of the really bad ones, and said, you know what, Patty, it's time for you to go have some conversations. So I did. I started with the women and found out they just, quite frankly, weren't comfortable, right? Again, 30% of a room has to be women in order for a woman's voice to be heard. How many of you have been the only woman in a room? Exactly. How many of you have been mansplained? How many of you have had something to say, have it get a nod or maybe, some acknowledgement, but then a guy says it 10 minutes later and it's the best idea since sliced bread? Exactly, right? So again, Seth, can you work on that? Okay. So again, it's not because these are bad people. This is what we're conditioned to do. And ladies, we listen to the guy too. So one of the things we're going to start doing is, that's amazing. You know what? Bridget just said that. I love Bridget. Can you tell me that again? Right? Let's start using that, instead of, are you kidding me? Do that one instead, right? Let me do that one, yeah. So the women were like, Patty, I don't want to be you. I don't want to raise my hand and be that woman. I don't want to do that. And with the men, the common ground was this. They had daughters, not wives, not mothers, right? Not nieces. They had daughters. And they loved technology, and they wanted to make sure that their daughters had the same opportunities as your sons. Whatever gets them in the door. And you work from there. So that was really when I started incorporating the common ground piece. The understanding that when there is a problem, you can point fingers at each other all you want. That's not going to get you anywhere. I'm going to totally overuse this because it's not working for you. Instead, especially on unpopular topics that are emotionally charged, and this is a very emotionally charged topic because you have folks on one side who are either thriving in a system or at least comfortable with that system. And you are threatening that system. That's what disruption is. That's why there's pushback. It's not because you're a bad person. It's not because they're a jerk. So to be able to find that common ground, and instead of you making it about you, it becomes about the system. So you might be asking yourself, right, what does this have to do with you? Tell me if any of this sounds familiar. When I was going through this whole exercise back then, and still stuff I go through now, this happens to me all the time. I'm just more comfortable with being uncomfortable at this point, right? I'm almost like, God, if I don't get, some kind of whiplash, I'm not doing enough. That's kind of where I'm conditioned at this point. This is my daughter. This is my 18-year-old, Bella, and I love this t-shirt. Nothing changes if nothing changes. Would you like to say it, Jennifer? Exactly. It's another way to say, how's that working for you? When I look back to that experience on the stage, I think about how I was looking for perfection in the name of consensus or full alignment. Not going to happen in the real world, right? It's just not going to happen. One of my favorite leaders, Bill McDermott, who's the CEO of SAP, once told me, and he's a big driver of change, and he's not very, can be polarizing. And he's a sales guy who runs a development organization that was founded in Germany, right? He's American, so he's got a lot kind of not working in his favor, and yet he's led this incredible change because what he has found out is be the water in rapids. You are going to come across barriers that are going to get in your way. You decide, is it worth it, or do you just go around it? There are going to be people who are there at certain parts of your journey, allies, let's call them, who are going to help you get from one rock to the next rock. There are going to be people who are standing in your way. There are going to be people who are only there for part, people who are there for the full. It doesn't matter. Don't go for full alignment and consensus. That will kill you. Find those allies and also decide, does every barrier get the same level of heat? We tend to focus in on barriers that quite frankly don't matter because they said something wrong. They said something bad, right? Instead of focusing in on, but she said something great that can actually help me navigate that, right? So nothing changes if nothing changes. And I think the biggest thing that I got in learning from these incredible women I've been able to study, not only for my dissertation, but also in the book, is that when you're a disruptor, those barriers, they become your path to disruption. That is your path. You're creating something that didn't exist before. Your job in leading that is to sweep the debris out of the way so that you can bring people along with you, right, that can have smooth sailing, at least for this part of the journey. And with that knowledge, I was able to depersonalize the barriers in the forms of people, in the forms of policy, in the form of whatever it might be. And I became a woman on a mission. And now I view things so differently. Of course I care what people think. Of course I do. But it doesn't have the same emotion. Instead, I use empathy to go, why do they think that way, right? What's going on in their world? What are some of the questions I can ask them to find out so that we can find common ground together? So you might be asking yourself, as I said, what the heck does Patty's weird stories have to do with me? And that's a fair enough question. So I'm going to ask you some questions. Do any of those experiences ring true for you? Have you led disruption of a topic where it was just completely opposed, it was unpopular? Have any of you done that? Have you ever faced challenges with leading differences? If you're not nodding your head, there's a problem, right? You're leaders in this room. That's why you're here. It's okay to call it out. It's okay to say, that was not awesome. That's okay, right? How many of you have internalized the negative? Exactly. So have I. Only to learn that it was neutralizing, right? That was critical. I like to call this, as the drama queen I am, right? Those kind of like, oh shit kind of moments of what the heck am I doing? Why can't I just be happy with the way the world is? Blah, blah, blah. Call it the dark night of the soul, because I feel like it really drives it home. But that's exactly what it feels like. Nothing's going to go right. I'm never going to turn this around. Not only is this topic unpopular, oh my God, I'm becoming unpopular. And not in a high school kind of way, but in a reputation way. We work so hard to build up our reputations. We ask ourselves, like, what's the risk? And quite frankly, is it worth it? And then you go back to your North Star, which by now, because you've talked to enough people, right, you've been able to refine it to make sure that that North Star is creating something more effective, something more efficient. So think about it. Have people given you a hard time? Were you able to resolve challenges by finding common ground? Were you able to find someone to listen, someone of influence who others would listen to, right? Someone in the C-suite, an executive. What did it take in order for you to do that? And what happened when that person stood up and said, what Bridget's bringing to the table is important. Let us all listen, right? Things change. It's incredible. And the big important thing here is sometimes it just starts with a conversation. Maybe it's that boss who supported you that you're thinking about, only to find out that that big program that got the thumbs up was only a quarter of the way invested, or a half of the way invested in, and then it's deemed a failure, and oh, by the way, you just happen to be the one to do it, and therefore you've wasted our time and our money, right? Maybe that's what you're thinking of, and that requires just another conversation. It's very hard to get rid of unconscious bias when you're thinking, when you're doing, without what's called decision interruption. You cannot do it on your own. You can ask yourself, is that still working for you? And you can also have a conversation to get someone else's opinion. One of the things I work a lot with organizations on is figuring out the very thing that this conference is about, which is your North Star. Most of the folks I coach, most of the companies I work with, don't really actually know what that is. They don't know what their North Star is. They're like, yeah, I'm all for disruption. What do I disrupt, right? What's my big thing? Or they do know, but they're thinking of it too broadly. They want to boil the ocean. That's not how change actually happens. You got to carve out. Another thing I learned from these women, you don't own the whole problem, you own the part of it that you can actually bring something to the table, the people, the experience. Typically, this is about a week's worth of work nonstop. We've boiled it down into 3 boxes. So each of you has this piece of paper that was on your chair, and you're going to go through this exercise. You're going to use this to help you create disruption as one of the keys in your leadership superpower. So the first question you're going to answer is, What is the status quo that you want to disrupt? Answering, thinking about things like what has to change, what could be better. This could be something around you, it could be you. It doesn't matter. Then the next thing is what always stops us in our tracks, the naysayers. What are the naysayers going to say? That doesn't work, it doesn't make any sense, it's too soon, we've tried that before. Knowing, by the way, the biggest naysayer is the one in your head, right? It's our own bias about ourselves that stops us or starts us. List them all out. Don't give them power. And then the final thing is, what are you going to say? Don't get started yet. The final thing is, what are you going to say to those naysayers when those things come up? So for me, like I said, right, I'm a disruptor of unpopular topics. My big driver is women in the workplace. I don't have time, but I'm sure you've heard them all about why this is stupid, including the, are we still talking about this? I thought we solved it already, which is always my favorite. And the last thing always brings me back to Maslow, because I don't think of Maslow's hierarchy as a pyramid. I think of it as a mountain. And what happens when you go up a mountain? You lose oxygen, right? There are fewer people the higher you go. You need to be conditioned to do it. Every time I start a disruption, I start back at that bottom level, and I've got to condition myself to go up. So for me, what I say is, this is my Everest. Is that all you got? Which, by the way, I did say to the doctor yesterday. Is that all you got? So what I'd like you to do is, at your table, I would like you to identify your GC partner. You know what GC is, right? Right? Anyone? It's geographically convenient. Okay, so that's what you're going to do. Now, chances are you're sitting next to someone who you know very well, and maybe you're sitting next to somebody who you don't know well. Go with the person who you don't work with every day, if possible. You're going to spend about 8 minutes on this. Your first decision is who goes first. And I'm going to walk around and just kind of listen in. 4 minutes. I love the conversation. I love the buzz. It's been amazing. Not uncommon to see a lot more talking and not a lot of writing, right? This is some pretty deep stuff, and I love it. So I have asked one brave soul from the audience to stand up and share the disruption that she talked about as a way to make it her superpower. So where is my friend? Is it Lativa? Larita? Larita? First of all, your dress is spectacular.
Thank you.
Oh, spring is here.
All right, we were just having a casual conversation. Now I got to be all proper and all together. And so my status quo that I want to disrupt is unconscious bias. And what would I like to change? The ability for people to have authentic conversations, and the ability to find common ground as you talk about and you call it out, because everybody has unconscious bias. And to make it a safe place for you to call it out, acknowledge it, find common ground to figure out where is it coming from. Hey, Candace. To figure out where it's coming from. And then allowing people to be vulnerable in the conversations. So that's mine.
And what are you going to say? Have you thought of something that you're going to say to the naysayers?
That you're not wrong. That we all can come together and find out through our own personal stories where it comes from, and to learn from it, and to go forth as a result of it.
Oh, it's awesome. Thank you.
I work at Goodwill Industries of the Southern Piedmont.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, and it's a joyful place to work, because it's really all about helping people to see possibilities and seize opportunities. Yes.
I love that. Thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for sharing. That is incredible, absolutely incredible. It is not easy to stand up and talk about something you just started talking about 8 minutes ago, right? But doesn't that say so much about this conference? You're in a safe place right now. The topics that you lead, that you focus on, that you want to disrupt, they are emotionally charged. You are messing with someone's system. You do need to be brave. You are this girl, right? And you're not in it alone. How awesome is that? So as we wrap up, I just need to acknowledge something. One of the things we love about keynotes is we get inspired, right? All these new ideas, it's exciting. And then what happens? You leave the room, you forget what you heard, right? Or if you remember, you go, reality hit, right? And you start thinking about unconscious bias or whatever that topic is, and you start thinking about yourself leading us all to a new status quo, a new promised land, and you start going, yeah, but, right? You start thinking about the times you've done this before, about how hard it's going to be to get this leader to agree with you, a leader who's so critical, or I don't have the right degrees for this, or I don't have enough experience, or I'd be starting from scratch, right? All of those naysayer things. Because the skeptic we call reality sets in. Sure, right? We're all agreeing with you in this room. We all think it's critically important to create those cultural changes. But I'm here to tell you it's not impossible. It is not impossible. Very quick story. I came to running very late in my life. I was in my 30s. I was not an athlete. Being an athlete was never modeled for me. We participated in sports by sitting on the couch and eating popcorn and turning the TV on. And as the youngest, this will date me, I was the one who had to get up and change the channel. I was the remote control. And so, yeah. So not super easy. So anyway, so I started this Couch to 5K running program with a bunch of other women and really never felt like I fit in, right? I couldn't see myself at the finish line. I couldn't see myself at the start line, and neither could anyone else, because at the time I was 365 pounds. And so not only could I not see myself, neither could the people, the freaking clothes didn't fit me, right? So I definitely was not modeled for me, it wasn't created. And little did I know, just by taking that first step in a place where I was so afraid to fail in front of everybody, because they already were convinced I shouldn't have been there anyway, and it was kind of like, a lot of them had told me afterwards that they were insulted I was there because of all of the training they had. I know, they're lovely. Little did I know, right, that I would go on to run over 100 5Ks, 50 10Ks, 10 marathons. I don't even know how many triathlons. Thank you. Yeah, wait a minute. Before you get all fancy and excited and impressed, people with walkers were going past me, okay? But now I can't even walk. But so, you know, in a world, 60 million people in the US are runners. And I want you to do two things, please. The first is find a woman you're working with, probably a millennial, I don't know if Gen Zs have really started in positions that you guys would work around, but find a woman, a Gen Xer, I don't care who it is, who is like a change agent, doing incredible work, but is always overlooked, right? Go find her and bring her out to coffee, to lunch, something every quarter. Start asking her questions about what motivates her. And more importantly, what does she want to do? Because women, we get hired for our experience. Men get hired for their potential. When a woman doesn't know something, she takes a class because that's what she's conditioned to do. When a man doesn't know something, he takes the job. Right? So the number one thing that is different between men and women is women are mentored. Unless you have less than 10 years of experience, I'm here to tell you, you don't need to be mentored. You need to be coached or advocated for, and that's what sets men apart. That's how they get accelerated, when they're not in the room. So then your job is to learn from her. What does she want to do? And when you're in her room and you hear about a next big project or that next big role, and that's what she says she wants to try, you raise her name up. You become the voice in the wilderness. You become the woman that lifts the others up. And absolutely, the second thing is to find the woman who is the rising star, right, who everyone's watching, and to take her out, maybe not as frequently, but to find out what makes her tick, what motivates her, engage her with some of the other folks, men and women with whom you work. Use your platform to create an even bigger platform to orchestrate a new conversation. You have so much power. You have so much power. So think about how you can use that to really change the game.
What a great close. Clap, round of applause again.